It was the last week before I had to head back to college, and my friends Jess and Katie decided that we needed one more adventure before the summer officially ended. We planned a light hike through the woods and an overnight campout, but nothing too intense. No pun intended for those who just got my intense joke. Anyways, we just wanted enough of a getaway to feel like we'd done something for our summer besides working and binge-watching Netflix. And the day started out exactly how we hoped. We packed up the car with our gear, grabbed some snacks, and hit the road with music blasting and the windows down. I think we played Wrecking Ball by Miley Cyrus at least 7 times. And the hike we chose was about an hour away, in a spot Jesse's older brother had told us about. It's pretty secluded, he said, but it's beautiful and you'll practically have the place to yourselves. And that sounded perfect to us. On the way, we decided it wouldn't be a real camping trip without some beers, so we pulled into a gas station to try our luck. Now, none of us were 21 yet, but Katie, with her usual confidence, strode into the store to give it a shot. Jess and I waited in the car, laughing and chatting, but when Katie came back out empty-handed and shaking her head, we knew that it was a no-go. In an annoyed voice, she said, "The stupid guy wouldn't even entertain the idea." And Katie sighed as she slid back into the driver's seat. I could tell that she was slightly embarrassed. Katie wasn't used to hearing no, I guess. And just as we were about to give up on the beer idea, a guy who had been filling up his tank walked over to our car. And he looked normal enough. He was of average height and a little scruffy, maybe in his mid-20s. He was wearing this nice purple flannel that didn't look ragged or gross. Most noticeable, though, was that he had this friendly smile, but something about the way he was so quick to approach us set off a tiny alarm bell in my head. In a deep and almost bellowing voice, he says, "Hey," and then he started leaning down to Jess's window. "Saw you had some trouble in there. Need help getting something?" His tone seemed casual, but his eyes were all over each of us, lingering just a bit too long for comfort. Katie, always the bold one, jumped at the chance. Yeah, could you grab us some beers? We got cash." She handed him a 20 and he nodded, smiling. "Sure thing. What do you want?" Still, something about his handsome smile was just off to me. Katie continued talking to him, and I tried silently communicating my unease with Jesse and Katie, but it was just too late now. The guy was already walking into the store. When he came back out, he had a case of beer in one hand and the change in the other. "Here you go," he said, handing it all over with that same smile. But then he hesitated like he was waiting for something. "Thanks, man," Katie said quickly, grabbing the beer and giving him a sort of little wave, and we drove off. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back and saw that he was just still standing there, seemingly watching us. That was weird," I muttered, but Katie brushed it off by saying something like, "Oh, relax, he's just being nice. We got our beer, didn't we?" And the drive to the trailhead was uneventful, and soon we were out in the woods, surrounded by tall trees and the sound of birds. The hike was gorgeous, just like Jess's brother had said. The path wound through the trees with sunlight flittering through the leaves, and we were laughing, taking pictures, and enjoying the peace that came with being away from civilization. But as the day wore on, I started to feel a little uneasy. Every now and then I thought that I heard something. Simple things, like a twig snapping, the leaves rustling, or the sound of a sudden shifting in the distance. But whenever I turned around, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just the usual sounds of the forest because, honestly, they were. No matter what I told myself, I just couldn't shake a certain feeling. And by the time we set up camp, the sun was finally setting and our little corner of the forest started to get dark very fast. We built a small fire, roasted some marshmallows, and cracked open a few of those beers that we almost didn't end up with. Jess and Katie were having a blast, and on the surface, I appeared to be having a blast as well as I continued trying to ignore the creepy darkness around us. While we were sitting around the campfire, it was Jess who first mentioned the sounds out loud. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. It sounds like, I don't know, like someone walking around out there. Katie was quick with a response saying, "Come on, it's probably just animals." But even she didn't sound entirely convinced. We all sat there, listening intently, but after a while, the noise stopped and we tried to shake off the uncomfortable vibe that was surrounding the fire now. Eventually, we crawled into the tent, snuggled into our sleeping bags, and tried to get some sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. The sounds outside started up again. It was faint, but at least to me, the sounds appeared unmistakable. All those twigs snapping and the leaves rustling sounded a lot like bipedal footsteps. And my heart was pounding, and I could tell by the way Jess and Katie were shifting in their bags that they clearly were awake and hearing it too. After what felt like hours of just lying there, eyes wide open in the dark, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. The fire had died down before we got into the tent, and I wanted to make sure that it was completely out by now. I whispered to the girls that I was stepping outside for a minute, and they seemed to agree silently. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cool night. The woods were pitch black except for a little glow of the embers from our fire. I grabbed a bottle of water and was about to pour it over the coals when I heard those rustling sounds again, except this time it sounded like footsteps, and it sounded like it was directly behind me. I froze, and I remember being unable to catch my breath. Slowly I turned, and there, standing just a few feet away, was what I could only describe instantly as recognizing the guy from the gas station. His face was barely visible in the dim light, but in that instant my mind knew that was him. I recognized the purple flannel from earlier, and I wanted to scream and run, but I was rooted to the spot. I was so scared that it felt like I had forgotten how to breathe. The guy just stood there, staring at me, not moving a muscle, which somehow made this entire interaction even worse. It felt like an eternity, but finally, I found my voice. "Get away from me!" I screamed, and the sound seemed to snap him out of whatever trance he was in. He took a step back, and then another, and before I knew it, this guy was sprinting off into the woods. I didn't wait to see where he went. I ran back to the tent. Jess and Katie were rolling around as they heard me scream. I started to shake them and yelled, "We need to go now!" And I could feel my voice shaking. My friends didn't really question what was happening. I started saying about how the guy from earlier was outside the tent, and apparently that was enough to get my friends panicking and packing. And we packed up all in record time. Not even bothering to fold the tent properly, we just stuffed everything into our bags and took off down the trail. I remember the trail back being so nerve-wracking because we could barely see anything. It was dark and our flashlights didn't do much to illuminate the path other than the trees that were directly in front of us, and every sound we heard made us erratic and just caused us to run faster. We got to the car, and it still wasn't even dawn yet. We didn't say much on the drive home, as all of us were just still too freaked out to process what had just happened. And in hindsight, we should have just called the police right then and there. But getting away was the only thing on our minds at that time. When we finally pulled into Jess's driveway, we just sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead. And that's when I finally called the police and reported what had happened. I told them about the guy from the gas station, and I told them about the approximate time that we had encountered him. I remember Katie begging me to get off the phone with the police because she was scared that she was going to get in trouble for the alcohol. But if this guy was some sort of creep, I wanted to make sure the cops knew. Now, it's been years now, and we never did figure out what that guy wanted, or if it even truly was him from that place following us. And after that night, we decided our summer adventures were over. I can still imagine the sight of him standing there in the dark, staring at me, and I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone out to check the fire. Not that it's the most reassuring thought, but I also hope that this man was just a peeping creep, and not something way, way worse. Last year, my boyfriend and I took a trip to Mexico to celebrate our anniversary. Now, we speak a fair amount of Spanish, enough to get around comfortably, and have been enjoying the trip so far. We started in Playa del Carmen and then moved to Cancun, hoping for better beaches with less seaweed. We relied on taxis to get around, including the hour-long ride from Playa to Cancun, and everything had run smoothly up to that point. On our anniversary, we spent the day exploring, soaking up the sun and enjoying the local vibe before heading back to our hotel to freshen up for a special evening. We decided to try a place called Toro Rojo, famous for their super nachos, and as a nacho lover, I was beyond excited. According to Google Maps, it wasn't far, so we decided to walk. We set off, full of anticipation, but after walking around 45 minutes along a bustling highway, I checked my phone again and realized that we still had over an hour to go on foot. The distance seemed much longer than expected, and frustrated and hungry, we decided to just hail a taxi to save some time because those nachos and daiquiris were calling my name. A taxi pulled over, and then we hopped in and told the driver that we wanted to go to Toro Rojo. He claimed that he didn't know where it was, and so we handed him my phone with Google Maps open. The directions were simple. Drive straight, take a U-turn, and the restaurant would be on the left. He started driving, and I kept an eye on the map from over his shoulder to ensure that we stayed on track. And as we finally approached that U-turn, the driver didn't slow down. Instead, he passed it. I figured maybe he wasn't familiar with the exact spot and gave him the benefit of the doubt, and then he passed another U-turn, and another. And by now, alarm bells are going off in my head. I grabbed my boyfriend's phone and discreetly typed, "He keeps missing the U-turns. Tell him that's the other way." My boyfriend calmly told the driver in Spanish, "It's the other way," and the driver ignored him and picked up some speed, now going about, I think, 20 miles over the speed limit. And my heart was racing, and I could barely breathe. The driver muttered something like, "My English is not good," which made no sense since we were speaking Spanish, and my boyfriend tried again, this time firmer, saying something like, "Here is fine," and the driver didn't stop. My boyfriend raised his voice and started shouting something in Spanish, and finally, the driver slowed down. I remember, as soon as the car stopped, I leapt out, and by that point, I was shaking with fear. The driver demanded $30 USD, an absurd amount for such a short ride, but my boyfriend handed it over without hesitation, just wanting the situation to end. We sprinted in the opposite direction, our hearts pounding, and when we checked Google Maps, we realized the driver had taken us 9 miles outside of Cancun, leaving us stranded like 12 miles from our hotel. And it was pitch black, with nothing around us but trees and empty road. It was 11 p.m. and our cash was almost gone since the driver had taken most of it. And desperate, I called my parents, who stayed on the phone with us while we walked toward the nearest hotel. It was over an hour on foot. Being in that kind of pitch darkness, it was terrifying, and every sound made me jump. At one point, a red Mini Cooper appeared out of nowhere, slowly following us, and the windows rolled down, but the driver didn't say anything. My boyfriend, already on edge, banged on the side of the car and yelled some sort of expletive, I'm not really sure, and the car sped off. Not long after, we encountered 2 stray dogs ahead of us, and my boyfriend whispered, "What if they aren't friendly?" and picked up a couple of rocks just in case, and it broke my heart. Being pre-vet, I adored animals, but safety came first, obviously. And luckily, the dogs were sweet and only wanted attention, and we pet them briefly before getting back on the move. Then, as if the night couldn't get any worse, a truck pulled up alongside of us. The driver asked if we needed a taxi, but it was clearly an unmarked car, and we just waved him off. But he didn't drive away. Suddenly, those stray dogs sprinted toward the truck, barking ferociously, their demeanor completely changing. Without hesitation, we turned and ran the other way, trusting those dogs' instincts. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached a hotel where we managed to get a taxi back to our hotel safely. We were physically and emotionally drained, and while we made it out unharmed, the experience left us very shaken. I don't know if we were just lucky or if something more sinister was at play, but it's left me very reluctant to visit that part of Mexico again.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
I really wasn't planning on telling this story, but it's been a few years and I'm not as freaked out by what happened as I used to be, so why not? I was only 19 at the time. I moved across the country the year before college and had never had any issues driving home for the different breaks that we had over the school year. It was winter break and my mom really wanted me to come home that year to celebrate the holidays with my family since I hadn't the year before. I agreed, but I really didn't want to leave my car for weeks. There had been a lot of car break-ins in the city that I lived in, and leaving my car to be vandalized, broken into, or stolen just was not an option to me. I told my mom that I'd be driving home, and she wasn't too happy about it, but understood. She offered to have my dad fly out and drive with me, but I didn't want them to go through all that trouble, and I thought a few days on the road by myself would be a good thing. I've been having issues in my personal life, and having the time to think about it without any distractions seemed like a good thing to me. I packed up a few bags that would last me the next few weeks and said bye to my roommate, who was pretty bummed out about me leaving, and headed out the door. Thinking back on it now, my car probably wasn't worth what I went through during that drive home. It was a 20-year-old Honda Civic that had the propensity to break down a lot, and by a lot I mean at least once a month. I just didn't have the money to replace it. I hopped in the car and was on the highway within a few minutes. I got some coffee before heading out of the city so I could stay awake as long as possible. It was still around 8 in the morning, so I figured I'd drive for around 10 hours before hopefully finding a hotel and settling in for the night. I had no definite plans and was following the fastest route home, which probably wasn't the best decision. I know now that I should have taken the route that didn't involve long stretches of highway with nothing but fields for miles and miles. I stopped a few times for a bathroom and snack breaks, and by at around 7 p.m. I was done. I'd been driving for almost 11 hours and didn't want to be a hazard to myself or others on the road if I kept driving while being that exhausted. I found a relatively nice hotel and got a room for the night and continued my drive the next morning. That day I'd be driving through parts of the Midwest, and it wasn't necessarily something I was looking forward to. The last time I drove through it, it was a lot of just flat land and cornfields. Both things I thought were boring to look at on a long road trip. It was winter though, so there was no corn. The weather could have been better, but I had no issues the day before, so I hoped that it would stay that way. The day went by faster than the previous one, and the sun was down before I knew it. By 6 p.m. I was feeling pretty good to keep going, so I passed through the next city and drove on. Around 7, I started hearing a knocking sound and wanted to cry when I realized that it was coming from my engine. It had started to snow, and my car began to creep along the road until I pulled to the side of the road where it completely gave out. It was getting cold without the heater on, and I knew that I had to get help very soon. I checked Google Maps to see if I was close to another city, but the next town, albeit a very small one, was still almost an hour away. I tried calling my parents to tell them what happened, but my service was completely out. I decided to use the emergency calls only button on my phone to call for help, and thank God it worked. The only problem was the closest officer that could respond was at least an hour away in the town that I mentioned earlier. I told the dispatcher that obviously I'd wait, and she instructed me to lock the doors and try to hide myself inside the car enough to where it looked as though no one was inside. Apparently, right where my car decided to die on me also happened to be a very sketchy section of the highway that wasn't very safe for stranded drivers, especially young women. I'm not gonna lie, having the dispatcher tell me that made me feel physically ill. I felt like I was gonna have a heart attack with how fast my heart was racing. I put up a sun shield in the windshield area and thankfully had 3 extra ones in the car from when I went car camping, and decided to put those along the sides and back windshield as well so no one could see it and it would look like almost black from the outside. Around 30 minutes into me waiting, I started getting the feeling like somebody was watching me. Now, I tried convincing myself that it was just because of the situation that I was in and that all the windows were covered anyway, so there was no way that that was possible. I wanted to shake it off, but the feeling just wouldn't go away. No matter how much I told myself that I was okay, there was something inside of me telling me the situation I was in was about to get very, very scary. I turned on the screen on my phone and faced it in the direction of the windows, not knowing what I was about to see would traumatize me for years to come. At first, I felt some ease seeing only the reflection of the sunshield. I turned my phone towards the passenger side windows, and in the small crack that wasn't covered, to my horror, a strip of window was visible, and on the other side of the window was the face of a man pressed against the glass with a smile, staring directly at me. My first reaction was this blood-curdling scream. It was a sound that I didn't know that I even had the ability to make. It was like fear itself was manifesting in sound. It almost actually rang my ears, and the second the scream left my mouth, I watched as the man lifted his face from the glass and heard him begin to laugh, the most awful, guttural laugh I'd ever heard. Immediately, I heard the car move as the man violently tried the door handle to get access into my car. I was screaming and crying as he hurled himself around the car, howling like he was some animal between his laughing. It felt like he was taunting me in a way. I called 911 again and was screaming that I needed help now. The woman who answered the second time wasn't as friendly as the first I'd spoken to only 30 minutes prior. She kept yelling at me to stop screaming, otherwise she wasn't going to be able to help me. I was crying, trying my best to calm down as the man outside began to bang on my window with what sounded like a hard object that possibly would make it possible for him to break into my car. The dispatcher began threatening me, telling me that it wasn't okay to prank 911, even though I insisted what was happening was very real. After 10 minutes of just pure agony, trying to make her understand as the man just outside my car was putting me through this, she hung up on me. And I felt completely helpless. In the moment, the only relief that I was feeling was the fact that he hadn't been able to break into my car. I called 911 again, hoping I'd get a dispatcher with more empathy, and thankfully that was the case. A man answered and immediately took my distress into account and helped me calm down enough to get the information he needed. The officer had been sent almost 45 minutes before, and now was only around 10 minutes away, and I was told that they'd have him get to me as quickly as possible, given what I was going through. I was hopeful, but that hope was ripped away when I heard the sound of what was obviously a rock being thrown at my windshield. It shattered just enough to motivate the man to get on top of my hood and start stomping the windshield until it was broken enough for him to reach a hand inside. I screamed and climbed into the back seat. I was trying my best to get out of reach of this very insane and clearly dangerous person. He started tearing the windshield out of the way, and his face was even scarier than it was the first time I saw it. I was paralyzed with fear as I watched him begin to climb between the glass into the car. I had no choice but to get out of the car and hope the officer was close by. I opened the door and turned on my phone's flashlight. I faced it toward the hood and was so relieved to see that he had become stuck. He was trying to climb out but wasn't able to. I then saw the beautiful, flashing red and blue lights in the distance and heard the sirens as he drove closer. I started frantically waving him down, and he pulled up beside me. He was out of his car in seconds, and another police car was pulling up behind him only a few minutes later. I was placed in one of the cop cars and watched as they actually drew their guns out, demanding that the man climb out of the car. This crazy guy was screaming and thrashing his body around. One of the officers grabbed him by the ankles and pulled him out of the vehicle. The man tried biting him multiple times before being slammed to the ground and handcuffed. They put him in the back of the other car and told me more officers would be coming down to take pictures of the scene, and a tow truck would be down to tow my car. I was driving to the police station and gave my statement about everything that happened. I called my parents, who bought me a plane ticket home from the nearest airport, which the officers were nice enough to drive me to. I wish I could tell you the man who did that to me even gave a reason as to why, but he didn't. He was so mentally deranged that they said that he wasn't even fit to stand trial eventually, and I guess he was taken to some state mental hospital where the last I heard he's still there. I wish that there was some justice for the hell that he put me through, and maybe some people would say there was, but to me, it wasn't justice. He isn't being punished. I am. The memory of what happened punishes me every day. It's gotten easier to deal with as time goes by, but it'll always be there to torture me anytime I'm reminded of that man in the window.
I was living with my boyfriend Mike in his apartment for the past couple years. Mike asked me to move in with him after a full year of our relationship, and I was so in love with him that I agreed without giving it a second thought. I guess I shouldn't have, because then I would not have experienced something this horrible in my life as I did. I mostly had the night shift at my work, so it was rare that I was able to give Mike much time, but I always prepared surprises for him on weekends to make him happy. It was one night when a little fire broke out in the office pantry during the first hour of our work, so they let us leave early for the night. I was happy to give Mike a surprise and plan some naughty stuff to do with him, but I think that it is true that when you're too excited, your crying days are about to begin. As I unlocked the apartment door, I saw a naked woman giving Mike a blowjob in the living room while he was sitting there enjoying it with his eyes closed. A word, I walked into my bedroom. They noticed me and Mike rushed after me, but I closed the door and looked from the inside. I took out my suitcase and started packing my things. Did not want to think about what went wrong there in our relationship, so I just continued packing stuff. One thing I was sure about was that I'd wasted 3 years of my life for this bastard, and I was not going to waste another minute of my life after him. When I was done packing, I opened the door with the suitcase in my hand. He was standing there in front of the door with a towel wrapped around his waist, and the girl was sitting there naked on the sofa. Without saying a word or looking into his eyes, I started walking towards the apartment door. "Stella, don't leave. I'm sorry. Stella. Please hear me out, Stella." As he kept saying all this, I walked out of the apartment and then the building. I continued walking with an empty mind in the middle of the night. The only thing that came to my mind was that I should go to my parents' house. I looked around hoping to find a taxi, but I was not in any luck, because there was not even one single taxi in sight. Even though I'd never done it before, I decided to hitchhike to my parents' house. So I took up my thumb, hoping to get a ride from someone. That was when a car stopped in front of me. The guy who was driving asked me about my destination, and I revealed it to him. He told me that he was going in the same direction and that he'd be more than happy to drop me off. It felt awkward to me, but I thought that it must be because it's my first time doing so. I got in. He started asking me some personal questions, but I was not in the mood to reply either of them, so I strictly told him not to ask such questions. He got quiet after that, and it was good for me because I was disturbed enough that I did not want to speak to him or think of any of that thing. About 15 minutes passed in complete silence, and that was when he turned his head towards me and asked me to show him my private parts. I looked at him in surprise because I could not believe my ears. He gave me a creepy smile and reached out of his hand towards my breast. I slapped his hand away and asked him to stop the car in response. He looked at me angrily. I could not believe my bad luck. First Mike and now this creep. This day could not get any worse. I continued screaming at him and told him to stop the car. He did not do so. Instead, he started to try to grab me and kick me in response, making the car lose control. And then we got into an accident. I was on the verge of losing consciousness when I noticed him passed out and bleeding from his head. This was my chance to get away from him, and I tried to open the door. I don't know how, but in the process of opening the door, a glass fell on my hand, and my index finger got slid off and rolled over to the back seat. I did not have enough time to pick it up, and I had to get away from there before he woke up, so I somehow managed to get out of the car, and after that, I took my phone and searched for the nearest hospital. It wasn't very far away, so I dragged myself to walk there. Only I know how I managed to keep myself conscious all that time. Even after all those injuries and the blood that was dripping out from every part of my body, I somehow managed to bear the pain until I reached the hospital, and as soon as I reached the hospital, I passed out. As I was losing consciousness, I saw 2 nurses rush into my side. When I woke up, the doctors asked me what had happened, and I explained everything as far as I could remember. They reported this to the police for me, and the search for that blue car alone began. My finger was completely gone, and there were injuries on my neck and head as well. I don't know how Mike got the news, but he came to the hospital the next day. He was crying and begging me for my forgiveness, asking for me to give him a second chance, but I did not have enough energy in me to even look at him or speak to him again. So I simply ignored his presence, and I blame him for my condition, and I always will.
A 21-year-old Samantha Josephson grew up in Robbinsville, New Jersey, as the daughter of Seymour and Marcy Josephson. While majoring in political science at the University of Carolina, Samantha studied abroad in Barcelona and planned on attending the Drexel University School of Law after her 2019 graduation. Samantha was a girl who showed boundless potential, who was potentially looking at a partial scholarship to Rutgers, but all her dreams will be snuffed out after making just one fatal mistake. On the evening of March 28, 2019, Samantha went out drinking with friends at the Bird Dog Bar in downtown Columbia. At around 2 a.m., they decided to call it a night, and like so many of us have done before, Samantha pulled out her phone and ordered an Uber. Just 9 minutes later, surveillance footage from the Bird Dog shows a black Chevrolet Impala pulling up outside. Samantha steps outside and enters the vehicle and greets her driver. The man on the wheel was named Nathaniel Rowland, and although he didn't say anything as Samantha climbed into his car, he hadn't actually been expecting a passenger. You see, the car that Samantha had climbed into wasn't her Uber. It was just a similar-looking vehicle she had drunkenly mistaken for her ride. We'd expect from Roland into ultimately telling her to get out of the car, but he didn't. He simply engaged the locks, trapping Samantha inside, and then drove off. It's not clear whether or not Samantha realized her mistake before Roland stopped the vehicle, but at some point, Roland parked up his Impala, pulled out a knife, and inflicted a sustained and savage attack upon the terrified Samantha. Using a bizarre-looking two-bladed knife, Roland proceeded to stab Samantha 120 times. She attempted to shield herself, but she was trapped and Roland was armed, as there were several horrific defensive wounds. Roland also stabbed Josephson in her head with so much force that the knife went through her skull to her brain. A killer blow seems to have come when he stabbed her in her carotid, one of the two main arteries that carry blood to the brain. Samantha also sustained wounds to her face, neck, shoulder, torso, back, long leg, and feet, bleeding out within just 10 to 15 minutes. Roland then dumped Samantha's body into the New Zeon field, where she was discovered by a handful of local turkey hunters. The following morning, Samantha's roommate became deeply concerned when they found she hadn't returned home. Police rushed into action, easily tracing her last known whereabouts to the Bird Dog Bar and Nathaniel Roll's black Chevy Impala. Officers later happened to cross Roland while he was out driving, and after a traffic stop was attempted, Roland jumped out of the stationary vehicle and began to flee. Inside his car, police officers found a container of liquid bleach germicidal wipes and a bottle of window cleaner. But perhaps the most incriminating piece of evidence was Samantha's phone, which Roland had foolishly chosen to keep. He was arrested, questioned, and tissue samples were taken. Disturbingly, the tissues under the Roland's nail tested positive for Samantha's DNA, meaning whatever he was doing after he had killed her had been so vigorous enough for the particles of her skin to become embedded under his nails. Roland was charged with Samantha's kidnap and murder, and it became apparent that Samantha's wasn't his first kidnapping victim. He apparently carjacked a woman at a spotlight in October of 2019 and was extremely violent in the commission of the crime, beating her and threatening her before they drove to an ATM to almost empty her bank account. In July of 2021, Roland was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering, with a judge sentencing him to life in prison. The same judge, a veteran of the legal circuit, said that the murder was perhaps the most heartless and severe he had ever seen, denying Roland's request for leniency. It is also not easy to see why Roland displayed such horrifying predatory behavior. When a stranger accidentally climbs into their car, most correct thinking, people simply laugh it off, perhaps getting a little prickly if they're in a bad mood. Roland found a stranger climbing into his back seat, and his first thought were nothing short of bloodthirsty. Samantha Josephson made an honest and simple mistake, and Nathaniel Roland made her pay with her life.